Okay, this one is for the girlies, and more specifically, the Roman girlies. The majority of direct history we have from the Romans themselves often excludes women, unless, of course, they were made a pariah. But I want to talk about this woman here today, who not a lot of people know about because she's a woman and it was ancient Rome. But I wanted to emphasize just truly how much these women could shape the course of Roman history. So this woman right here is Agrippina the Elder. She was born in 14 BC and she was the granddaughter of Rome's first emperor, Augustus, and also his favorite. So her mother was Julia, the daughter of Augustus and his only child, and her father was Marcus Agrippa, the famed Roman general whose name is on the Pantheon. Given that she was the granddaughter of Augustus, that also made her the adopted great-granddaughter of Julius Caesar. So if you're catching the drift, she was basically as blue-blooded as you could possibly get in ancient Rome. Now we get to her husband. Her husband was Germanicus, the very popular Roman general, and he was actually set to succeed Tiberius, the heir of Augustus, after he died. Now this is kind of funky because, as we already said, Augustus only had a daughter and that was his only child, so kind of to save his succession crisis that he had, Germanicus was supposed to succeed Tiberius because him and Agrippina's children would be related to both Augustus and his wife, Livia. So the entire Julio-Claudian family tree is very Game of Thrones. So back in the day, Livia, his grandmother, divorced his grandfather, Tiberius Claudius Nero, to marry Augustus. Now, before we get into how things get dicey, I do want to note that Germanicus's grandfather was Mark Antony on his mother's side, the same Mark Antony that was in love with Cleopatra and was one of Octavian's rivals, aka Augustus. So Germanicus and Agrippina marrying each other kind of solved this weird feud that these two lines had going for decades. Now things get a little crazy. So while Germanicus was in Syria serving his governorship, he was actually poisoned, and his last words were, "I have fallen to the trickery of a woman." Now the woman he's referring to in his last words are none other than Plancina, the wife of the Roman statesman Piso, and also a very, very good friend of Livia. Now, when the people of Rome heard of Germanicus's death, they declared a state of emergency in front of the Senate, and this kind of exemplifies just how mournful the Roman people were upon hearing of his death. To the Romans, Germanicus was almost seen as Alexander the Great. And now, let's get back to our girl, Agrippina. Despite Germanicus pleading with his wife on his deathbed to not disturb people that were more powerful than her and to protect their children, she immediately marched back to Rome with his ashes. Upon arriving on the shores of Italy with Germanicus's ashes, crowds of mourners surrounded her and guarded her way back to Rome, which is where she starts her journey back to Tiberius and Livia to confront them because it was popularly believed that they were the ones who planned Germanicus's assassination. Now back in Rome, with her children, his funeral was a huge spectacle. Thousands of people came to mourn him, and he was interred in the mausoleum of Augustus. And you want to take a guess who was noticeably absent from the funeral? None other than Livia and her son, the Emperor Tiberius. Now, eventually, Piso was convicted and forced to commit suicide for the death of Germanicus. His wife, however, Plancina, got a special pardon from Livia and the Senate. Now, fast forward a few years, Agrippina, her husband is now dead, and Augustus is dead, her grandfather, and she is left extremely vulnerable. Now, Livia and Agrippina's relationship was never warm. Livia did not like Agrippina's political maneuvering while she was not empress yet, and obviously Agrippina thought that Livia and her son had a hand in her husband's death. But while Livia was alive, Agrippina was protected. Livia had a lot of sway over her son and was pretty powerful in the state of Rome. But eventually, Livia dies, and Agrippina is left even more vulnerable, and Tiberius becomes even more repressive. Now, eventually, one of Tiberius's guards and confidants, Sejanus, convinces Tiberius to turn on Agrippina and her family. And with that, Agrippina and two of her sons, her eldest and middle son, are exiled to Pandateria, which is an island off the coast of Italy, which is where Augustus exiled his daughter Julia, Agrippina's mother. In exile, Agrippina was beaten and treated terribly, to the point of going blind. Eventually, she died of starvation, and historians agree that it was likely at her own accord. But as soon as she heard of her exile, she sent her youngest son, Caligula, to go live with his grandmother, Antonia Minor. In 31 AD, after the fall of Sejanus, Caligula was actually called to the island of Capri by Tiberius. It's been said that Caligula's ability to mask his true feelings for the emperor and to appear as non-threatening is what spared his life. But, obviously, Tiberius has died, and with some help from the Praetorian Guard, Caligula becomes the next emperor of Rome. Now, it has been said that Caligula smothered his uncle Tiberius, but that has never been confirmed. One of Caligula's first acts as emperor was actually to return to Pandateria and retrieve his mother and brother's ashes to inter them in the mausoleum of Augustus in Rome. And now, if you know anything about Agrippina's children, Caligula and Agrippina the Younger, you know the story just gets crazier as it goes on. But for here, we will stop with Agrippina. Her political acumen still led to one of her children being on the throne and keeping the Julio-Claudian dynasty in power for another 31 years. She was the great-granddaughter of Julius Caesar. She was the granddaughter of Augustus. She was mother of Emperor Caligula. She was mother of Empress Agrippina the Younger, and she was grandmother of Emperor Nero, making her one of the most prominent women ever in Roman history.